Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel and welcome to a real cold, real life car review. It feels like minus 15 degrees Celsius at this moment, so let's get moving. This here is the current generation of the Toyota Hilux, and the new generation has just been revealed a month ago and will hit the dealer floors already in this year. Why am I driving this car? Well, I needed a good all-wheel drive vehicle to visit friends in the snowy Austrian Alps. It was a long journey, it's very snowy over there, but more importantly, the drivetrain in this car, Toyota's diesel hybrid, Toyota's only diesel hybrid, will also be used in the new generation of the Hilux, which for the first time will also be available as a full electric vehicle. So without any further ado, let's look at the drivetrain and let's get things going, because it's cold. So the current generation of the Hilux was introduced in 2015, so the model is already 11 years old. It was updated in 2020 and 2024 when it received a facelift. It's available with two engine options over here, a 2.4 and this 2.8 inline 4. It's the 1GD-FTV from Toyota. And with the facelifts, the updates, the power increased to a total power output of 204 horsepower and 500 Newton meters of torque. It is a mild hybrid. It utilizes an 84 volt starter generator, but you don't see that back in the power outputs. The other versions, the non-hybrid versions, also have the same 204 horsepower, 500 Newton meters of torque, and the added 20 horsepower and 65 Newton meters of torque from the starter generator doesn't add up in the total power and torque outputs. It's really used to fill in the gaps and to make the engine more supple in the lower rev range. It has a 4 valve per cylinder head, so 16 valve in totals. It has a variable geometry turbo. It's a modern turbo engine. It's Euro 6D compliant, means it uses a diesel particulate filter, and it also has selective catalytic reduction by injecting AdBlue or diesel fluid into the exhaust. I had a little minor issue with that system because the tank is empty, and when the AdBlue tank is empty, the car won't start anymore. It really needs to work, it really needs a fluid in order to be able to drive. The hiccup that I had is that I didn't fill up the tank completely, so the warning stayed, and with 800 kilometers to drive and a 600 kilometer AdBlue range, well, I got into a little bit of a problem, but I was able to fill it up, and then my problem was solved. So you really need to fill up the tank completely before the system resets, apparently. And as you may expect, the fuel consumption of a car with this aerodynamic characteristics isn't great. You can count on a fuel consumption of 10 liters per 100 kilometers. But a reliable source told me that when you start towing with this vehicle and you drive at slightly lower speeds, the fuel consumption actually gets better, up to 11.5 kilometers per liter. I'll blink the translations in screen. I will say this, I did a lot of autobahn driving and I had the idea that the car would be quite slow, but with 500 Newton meters of torque, it really picks up speed really fast. And the suspension is such that you can drive 140, 150 kilometers for hours and hours without having a nervous car, and the engine is really up to the job. When you start doing slower driving on country roads and use the car what it's built for, hauling heavy trailers or transporting heavy goods, the engine is easily up to the task. It's a real old school diesel, but I like the characteristics of this. Nice engine. Having a look at the engine bay, well, you could see the engine is longitudinally mounted. It in this car is mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission, and you have a selector for the 2-wheel drive, so then it's a rear-wheel drive, go into 4-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive with a low gearing to do really heavy towing when you have to pull out a heavy trailer out of sand and something. Anyway, very tried and true technology that also will be used in the new Hilux. So let's close up the hood and have a quick look at the rear end of this car. How about towing capacity? Well, it can tow up to 3,500 kilos, and this version with the 2.8 and automatic 6-speed transmission can load up to 1,100 kilos. This version, as you can see on the side, is the Invincible. It's one of the top models, and it comes with a nice bed liner, that roll bar, but it's also available with a cover, so you have a sort of large station wagon where the cargo space is completely covered, and it comes with this rolling cover, which is real nice, but it's a little bit stiff because it's so cold. This version is the short bed because it has a double cab, and there's something odd about these cars in the Netherlands, which I'll explain right now. Now, the Dutch version of the Hilux is somewhat of an oddball, especially in the double cab version. With the normal double cab and the rear seat in place, this car would be seen as a passenger car by the tax services. You cannot register this car as a commercial vehicle because they use a ratio between the load bed, load capacity and the passenger compartment. And that means it will never be seen as a commercial vehicle, and you have to pay taxes and emission taxes for a passenger car. And with the fuel consumption of this car, the taxes, just the emission taxes, would be over 100,000 euros. Now, Toyota lists the double cab versions with rear seat in their brochure, and the top of the range version, the GR Sport, would cost over 173,000 euros. So they have to use a trick with the double cab versions to register them as commercial vehicles. And what they do, they remove the rear seat, put in the dividing wall, and they close up the rear left window, so this is completely covered, can also not open. All of a sudden this is seen as a cargo area, and then with that little trick it falls into the commercial vehicle tax rate, and then this car as it stands right here will cost you around 60,000 euros. Would this have the normal double cab with rear seat, that would be 160,000 euros. So there's that. Alrighty, let's hop aboard. There's always this weird little hashtag with these vehicles. I also have that with the Toyota Pro Ace that I tested last summer. So let's have a quick look around in the interior. As you can see, it's an older generation of car. It was introduced in 2015, and it shows by the interior, but it works really well. I don't see that as a negative. The legibility of this gauge cluster is really great, and this little screen in the center provides a lot of information. But this just works. I like it. Toyota has included their new infotainment system in this little center console. It looks exactly the same, but it's slightly smaller. Works really well, and I use both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. CarPlay is super fast to connect wirelessly, and for Android Auto I would recommend using a wired connection. Works really well. So let's switch on this here. As you can see, it's cold. I'm wearing gloves, and then it's so nice to have physical buttons over here because the touchscreen, oh, it does respond. I didn't expect that. So that's a good thing. But it's better to have a physical button. So over here we have a little cluster for the climate control, and the upper trim levels get dual zone climate control. Here is the selector. Let me put on the light so it's illuminated. Here is the selector for the all-wheel drive. It's currently in high two-wheel drive. You have high four-wheel drive and low four-wheel drive, and that's for the really hard pulling work, towing work, if it needs to be done. It also has a drive mode selector that has, let me show you, it has sport, normal and eco, but in a car like this it doesn't make much sense. There also is a GR Sport version with a separate suspension. It has a larger track width in front, I believe 40 centimeters, and 15 centimeters in the rear, and also the ride height is increased by 20 millimeters, 2 centimeters. And in that car, a drive mode selector makes sense. And here is a row of buttons. Well, they are not very well placed. If you want to use, for instance, the heated seats, you really have to take your eyes off the road to find these buttons. And there are separate buttons for the hill descent control, the diff locks, and here is another terrain mode selector. As said, this is the selector for the automatic transmission. It's a very old school gated transmission, and it does have a manual interruption, but in manual mode it's fairly slow to respond. And also here we have a couple of buttons. You can idle up the engine to warm it up, and this is really nice to have for the regeneration of the diesel particulate filter. You can force it in regeneration by pushing this button, and there are plenty of cars that are having issues with the regen of the particulate filter, where they clog up because it gets interrupted due to short drives. And then you have to use a diagnostic tool from the dealer to force it into regen mode. But in this car there is a button over here and you can force it into regen mode, which I think is a nice thing to have. What I also really like, and a lot of my passengers like, is that it has this little digital clock on top of the dashboard. So it's very old school, but it just works. And I'm a little bit sad to see these kind of interiors go. Hard plastics. That will also be the case in the new Hilux, but the new Hilux will have full digital gauge cluster and a large infotainment screen. Also hard plastics, but the new Hilux will also have the option of a premium interior. Last thing I want to talk about are the seats. The seats in this case are clad in synthetic leather. As said, they are heated. The seating comfort could be better. It lacks just support in the lower back, and in longer drives you can really feel your backbone compress and you need to get out. Could be a little bit more supportive. They have full electric adjustability and a nice tilting function for the seat itself, so you have a lot of support in your upper legs, but the seats only lack a little bit in support for the back. Bolstering in itself is real good. And the last thing that I want to note is, well, it has a very steep windscreen, but it also has real slim A-pillars. So overall visibility from the driver's perspective is really good. Now let's go for the drive. Alright folks, let's get going. Let's do a genuine cold start. It's been 5 years that I last tested a diesel vehicle that also was a pickup, the SsangYong Musso. Now let's start up by switching off the overspeed warning, which is very easy to do in this little cluster, easier than in other modern Toyotas. And I'll also switch off the lane departure control. Talk more about that and why I do that in this drive segment, because the reasons are a little bit different than usual. Let's get going. Now let's warm up. This is a large 2.8 liter diesel. It takes a little bit of time. It is fairly efficient, so it does take some time to warm up. And as I showed you, there is this idle up button to warm up the car a little bit faster, but I'm not going to use that. It's a very traditional drivetrain with this automatic transmission incorporated. The shifts are smooth, they are fairly seamless, and even on the load the car has smooth shifts. As I explained in the under the hood segment, I've done a lot of highway driving actually, and the car picks up speed real fast. And when you're in Germany you have these nice uphills and downhills, especially in the Kassel region, which I also crossed, and then it needs to downshift 1, sometimes even 2 gears. Then those shifts can be a little bit harsh because it shifts down fast and the engine has some difficulty pick up engine speed, so then there is a little bit of bump. But then again, this car is not intended for highway driving. But when this car was developed, a couple of other manufacturers came out with their new pickups. I believe it were Ford with the Ranger and VW, and Toyota noticed that, and also noticed that these cars have very nice driving characteristic approaching that of a passenger car, normal, well, say SUV-like car. So Toyota restarted the development to improve on the drivability as a passenger car, so without load. Now I can tell you this is older generation of car. It's basically 2 model generations old, so it's telling that it is not a modern pickup. But also you have to keep in mind that I drove this car with a single driver without any load, and then the ride is a little bit bumpier. There is a lot of vertical movement, and also there is a fair amount of body roll, but that is something that will be improved in the new Hilux. But all in all, this was a fairly nice car to drive on the Autobahn on these long stretches, mostly because of its driving position. You have a real nice high up-seated riding position. it gives you a good overview and feels very much in control, so to speak. As you can hear, the engine noise is quite dominant, but it isn't annoying, but we can really tell this is an old school diesel, large one at that, and yeah, it makes itself heard under acceleration, but it adds some character to this car. And yeah, it is a bit noisier, but it's mostly wind noise what you hear. The tires, even though they are full-blown winter and off-road tires, aren't really that noisy, and the suspension is set up such that when you do driving at higher speeds, say 140, 150 kilometers an hour, the car feels fairly stable. And the older generations of the Hilux that I've driven will become very nervous. Straight line stability was abysmal, and it wasn't fun to drive any faster than 120 kilometers an hour. But that's not the case in this car, so it really has a passenger car-like feel to it. But as said, there's a lot of motion in the vehicle, and the wind noise, engine noise are quite dominant, especially the wind noise under higher driving. And the wind noise, due to the aerodynamics, pushes most down on the performance of this car. So it's not only fuel consumption, but it also makes itself heard. But then again, it's not such that you are dead and dead tired after driving 12 hours in this car. Mentioned I drove the Lexus RX first for the first leg of the journey, then switched over to this car, and at first glance I thought, oh boy, this is gonna be a really tiring ride, but it isn't. It's very, very doable. Now, there are two things that I noticed during my trip through Germany. One is the adaptive cruise control, the other is the lane departure warning. I always have the lane departure switch off on these back roads because of the very weird lane markings we have over here. But I also noticed in Germany that the camera system is pretty poor in picking up temporary lane markings, and it starts making corrections when it doesn't need to, and that's pretty annoying, especially since this car doesn't have a steer assist. It has normal old school hydraulic power steering. There's no electronic motor in the steering column that can make minute differences in many other modern cars. This car uses the braking system. It's called lane yaw assist, I believe, and it applies the brake on one side on the rear axle to pull the car back into the correct lane markings. The only thing about it, it has a very weird feel to it. It feels like the car is skidding, and it also makes a big movement in the car. There's a real shock to the car. Now, that isn't nice when the roads are actually snowy and icy, and more than once I had a feeling that the car was starting to skid, but that was the camera system thinking I was crossing the lane markings and it needed correcting, and that was not nice, so I had it switched off all the time. Also means that this car doesn't have auto steer or lane center assist, but to be honest, I didn't miss it. The straight line stability of this car is actually quite good. The only thing that disturbs this car's straight line stability is wind coming from the side, and at highway speeds, Autobahn speeds, you're constantly making small corrections, but with this steering system that wasn't all too hard to do. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the adaptive cruise control. So with one of the updates and upgrades of the Hilux, I believe it was in 2020, it also got adaptive cruise control, and it uses, it's real nice, the old school Lexus Toyota lever on the steering column. Now, I'm used to this system and I prefer this over buttons on the steering wheel, so this is very nice, but the setting for the adaptive cruise control go with this little button on the steering wheel. And the thing that I noticed is that the following distance and the response to slower vehicles that you're approaching is different from time to time. So there is not a really predictable way that the car behaves when it approaches a slower vehicle. Oftentimes I was approaching a truck with goes say 80 kilometers an hour, I was doing 110, 120, and I often thought, hey, did you pick up the car in front of you? And I looked at the display and I saw it didn't notice it, and then all of a sudden it saw it and then it started braking. It didn't do that all the time, but it had a different response every time. So that's the thing that really needs improvement. But then again, I expect that improvement to be implemented in the new generation of the Hilux. So anyway, let's head out to the highway and do a little bit of highway driving before we head over to the middle of nowhere for my final thoughts. Okay, we're on the on-ramp. We have a pretty stiff headwind, so let's just listen. Can't build up too much speed over here because the corner speeds are limited. When I steer, there's a fair amount of body roll, so let's hit it. So this is driving at highway speed. You can hear the wind noise. As said, we do have a headwind. Straight line stability is just good. But as you can hear, the wind noise is dominant. Basically, that's all you need to know about this car. I must say the audio system is pretty good in covering up the wind noise, and I switched off the overspeed warning, but if it would sound right now, you wouldn't even hear it because the wind noise is dominant. So let's take the off-ramp already and let's head out to the middle of nowhere for my final thoughts. So see you guys in the next scene. Yeah, it's way too cold and windy and the camera is about to tip over, so I'm gonna sit in the car and do my final thoughts. So I made 2 trips to Austria in 1 week. The first one with the Lexus RX, which proved to be a great traveling car, and I picked that car because I would end up in wintry driving conditions in Austria in the Alps, and the RX had an all-wheel drive system. But during my way back home, I encountered a severe snowstorm that lasted for hours and at least 500 kilometers, and that really tested the limits of the RX's all-wheel drive system, which is an all-wheel drive system. So a couple of days later I picked the Hilux and I got even worse driving conditions on the Autobahn. But this car, the Hilux, just shrugged its shoulders. I put it in all-wheel drive and I could just carry on. When I was in Austria, my friend and I went off-roading in the snowy mountain roads, unpaved roads, forest roads, and the car just didn't pass. I had planned to do something like this, and it's just amazing how capable this car is off-road. And even though this is a 10-year-old car, it's 2 car generations old, it's soon to be replaced, the car does surprisingly well on Autobahn driving, which this car is not designed for. So that gives me good hope for the upcoming edition of the Hilux, the new generation. And I will say this, it's this drivetrain that's been carried over into the new Hilux, that's the one to look out for. Yes, it will be available as a battery electric vehicle, but it's this old school drivetrain that will be carried over in the new Hilux that will make the battery electric Hilux a real hard sell. It's so incredibly capable, and I'm pretty sure that the Toyota engineers will have found a way to add a little bit more refinement, and that gives me good hopes for the new Hilux. Anyway, I had a lot of fun in this car, and it's just the power of the drivetrain, the effortlessness does on Autobahn driving, on off-road driving, it just keeps going. It's so confidence inspiring. So even though it's a completely different car than the Lexus RX, it proved to be pretty up to its task, even despite its age. So there's that. And with that, I would like to end this real life car review. I hope you liked following me along, and if you did, give me a like, give me a thumbs up, maybe subscribe to the channel, and if you want to help support the channel, you can do so by buying me a coffee. I will leave the link for that in the description box. For now, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye!